Welcome to this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I am Andrew Seidel, the Director of Strategic Response here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. As usual, if you've got questions about what we are discussing today, or anything related to FFRF, just type your questions in the comments, or you can email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. So it's one of my favorite months. The trees are turning, fall is in the air, Halloween and costumes are on the horizon, and pumpkin-flavored everything is back. And so is Sasha Sagan. Sasha, welcome back to Ask an Atheist.
I'm so happy to be here, Andrew. Thank you.
Now, before we dive in, I do want to give you a proper introduction. So Sasha Sagan is a television producer, a filmmaker, a writer, and a speaker. Her essays and interviews on death and history and ritual through a secular lens have appeared in The Cut, The Oprah Magazine, Literary Hub, Atmos, and beyond. Sasha regularly speaks on the ways that science can inform our celebrations, inspired in part by the work of her parents, Carl Sagan and Anne Druyan. Sasha first joined us back in May to talk about her wonderful book, For Small Creatures Such as We, Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World. This beautiful book it's part memoir, part guidebook, and part social history. And she's back because I wanted to touch on some of those issues again today. And Sasha, you've got the paperback version of For Small Creatures Such as We is coming out, right?
Yes, I do. Here, I happen to have a copy right here.
What a coincidence.
Can you believe it? But yes, I'm so happy to be back and talking about all these interesting topics with you again.
And the paperback, I understand it's got a discussion guide for book clubs in the back.
Yes, I really am so curious about how people interact with rituals and traditions, people who are secular, people who are, maybe 1 foot out the door, a little bit skeptical, but still sort of, want to do those things that honor their grandmother and make them feel connected to their family and their ancestors. And I have this fantasy that there's book clubs happening around the country where people are just really getting into the nitty gritty of what they believe and why they're having these rituals and traditions that we all carry on in one way or another.
I mean, I think it's a great topic for conversation, too. And it's how we can build up rituals and kind of add to our own and make them better. And I really think this is just a beautiful book. And the title is from one of my favorite quotes of all time. We talked about it last time. But can you remind everybody about why you chose this as your title?
Yeah, thank you. It comes from a line in the novel Contact, which is the only work of fiction that my dad ever published. And it's actually a line that my mom wrote, but it sort of crystallized this idea for those of us who don't think that there's anything else or, anything after death or anyone watching over us. Once we sort of go through the existential crisis of what that feels like, what's on the other side? And the rest of the line is, for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. And I think that, for those of us who, are secular, there's something really profound about the idea of well, then what do we have? And it's one another on this little lifeboat planet. And that's really something to celebrate, in my opinion.
I could not agree more. And for my money, more profound than anything you would find in any holy book. I mean, Sasha, we've got fall is here, right? Costumes are here, Hocus Pocus, both the movie and in general, pumpkin spice lattes. What's your favorite tradition from sort of the harvest season?
It's so amazing. I mean, I love Halloween. I really do love Halloween. And I just think that societies need that release valve from the, traditions and customs and decorum that they require of participants. There has to be a day where the rules are off and you can just go through the streets dressed as a monster or scantily clad or whatever it is and let your other self be out there. But the connection with the harvest is it's so funny. So we went, my husband, our daughter, and we went apple picking the other day, and I was like, there's really room to rebrand this from the basic be like Instagram influencer thing to like, this is like a harvest fall ritual of like the changing of the seasons and the biology of the plants and how much abundance the earth provides. And I was like, I think there's room for a new take on the apple picking Instagram trend.
I mean, I agree. I love Halloween. I lived in New Orleans for 7 years, and there wasn't kind of that, the release valve was just daily life in New Orleans.
All the time. Yes.
That was 7 years of walking around like that. But I mean, I think for me, that is one of my favorite things. But it is marked by that changing of the season. It's like the heat of summer is done. And you know, we always describe fall as kind of having that crispness in the air.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that the really at its most basic level, everything that we talk about related to this is related to that changing of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, I would go a step forward and further, and not to put too fine a point on it, but like I think it's about death and our relationship with death and our coming to terms with our own mortality. And, you know, so much of Halloween is about this sort of like manufactured fear and like our relationship with ghosts and zombies and all these things we've created to sort of reckon with our own mortality. And the trees appear to be dying. And that, for most of human history, winter was genuinely scary. There was a real chance we weren't going to make it through, that everybody in your group or everybody in your tribe wouldn't survive. And I think there's something in that is really profound and really connected to, you know, the way we, you know, our relationship with this time of year where we try to scare ourselves, you know. I mean, it's right. It is so much about our fear and our mortality. And I think that's really good. And you have, you know, like Dia de los Muertos, and you have other holidays that are connected to this concept too. And I think, you know, it's avoiding our own mortality never helps. I think coming face to face with our feelings about it is good. And Halloween and the related holidays are one way we can do that on some level. I
think that's an excellent point. And we're going to do a Dia de los Muertos episode on Ask an Atheist in a couple of weeks, I think. But yeah, I mean,
awesome.
You know, as you're saying that too, I'm thinking, I remember sort of when I became more active in secularism, and I remember learning that one of the reasons we celebrate Christmas around that time is that it is, you know, Invictus Sol. It's the celebration of the undying sun. And it's like, things are going to get better. Things are going to be light again. That sun is coming back. It's not gone forever, you know? And it really is, so much of it seems to be, even as you said, the changing of the seasons seems to be tied to that life and death cycle that we go through as humans.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what I write about and I'm interested in about is this idea that when you peel back like one layer of the specific custom and tradition and mythology, that really underneath there is a scientific phenomena, whether it's, you know, the equinoxes and solstices or the plant biology of the harvest, or even our own biology, you know, birth, coming of age, death, that's really around the world and throughout the eons what we're fixated on, and, you know, rightly so, but we've come up with so many different ways, and they're beautiful, many of them, to just come to terms with these changes that are so hard for us to process sometimes.
And that is one of the reasons I love your book at its most basic level, because it gets into that sort of science and biology behind all this. It's fascinating. And part of the reason I wanted to have you back today, specifically this week, is because this week has a lot of traditions and celebrations kind of that I don't like, that I, in a way, like loathe. And I want you to help me through that a little bit.
Okay, here to help.
So first, the Supreme Court kicked off its term on Monday. This is something that we law nerds call First Monday. There may have been a time when we could have looked forward to the court getting back to work as an exciting time, but this is a lawless, partisan Supreme Court, and reconvening means more damage to our democracy. Though the way this court has kind of abused the shadow docket, it does a lot of that damage even when it's not in session. So kind of what was once this celebration is now something to dread. The court has corrupted that tradition as it's corrupted the law. Now, so is there a way to reclaim, Sasha, these traditions that have been kind of corrupted or overtaken?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think the first element is just looking at it as a ritual. And, if you came from a totally different culture or another planet, to just see the pomp and circumstance and the costume of the robe and this mythology that we have, that the judiciary is independent, while we all openly talk about which justices are liberal and which are conservative and who should maybe retire before the midterm elections, not naming any names, but like we have this duality that we, like so many rituals and so many belief systems, there's a cognitive dissonance that we have as part of it. And I think the first step is just seeing it for what it really is. And I think that, like so many rituals and so many traditions, there may be a grain of something in the origin that was really beautiful and really profound. And there's a way to get back to that, but we can't do it without recognizing the parts that are really unpleasant or dangerous or outdated.
Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, the Supreme Court was created at a time when there were no political parties. I mean, and now there are. And you don't steal 2 seats on the Supreme Court so that you can put in a justice who you like better than another one. You do it so you can put in somebody who has the same partisan ideology that you do. And yes, I will say the name Justice Breyer. You should retire. But so first Monday also means that Sunday was something called the Red Mass. And for those of you who don't know, Red Mass is this Catholic Mass that's celebrated every year where the Supreme Court justices all go and worship together. The purpose is to basically invoke God over the court's new term. So this secular court that draws its power from we the people is kind of joining this religious ceremony. And Red Masses actually happen all over the country for legal professionals. But this semi-official worship service at the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle in Washington, D.C., it really kind of bothers me every year. I mean, the Catholic Church is not exactly impartial on legal issues. Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to one Red Mass and then she swore never to do it again. She said, "I went one year and I will never go again because this sermon was outrageously anti-abortion. Even the Scalias," referencing Antonin Scalia, "although they're much of that persuasion, were embarrassed for me." Now this year the Red Mass was like a little bit different. Only Chief Justice Roberts attended, which is probably good because apparently Brett Kavanaugh tested positive for COVID, which is, well, a whole other interesting thing given the way they've decided on religious exercise in church during pandemics. Anyway, this tradition also dates back to 1953, which if you've read The Founding Myth, you'll know came during a wave of Christian nationalism that swept the country and gave us things like "In God We Trust" is the national motto, and "Under God in the Pledge," and a prayer room in the U.S. Capitol, and the National Day of Prayer. So what I'm building to here, Sasha, is that some of the things about religious traditions, they only really unite the in-group. And everyone else is alienated. And I think that's what Ruth Bader Ginsburg felt when she went to that Catholic Mass. So, I mean, how can we reconcile these traditions which seem to be inclusive but really are actually more divisive?
I mean, just the phrase, "even the Scalias," really tells you everything you need to know. And there's something about it. I mean, the Red Mass, I mean, it's just so... To an outsider, it's just so Game of Thrones that I can't, you know what I mean? It's an amazing thing that I would assume most people aren't aware of. And when you talk about the in-group, I wonder about if, because there was a point in history of this country when Catholics, it was harder for them than Protestants to get through. Maybe this, there are certain things we do as overcorrections. And then when there's, maybe it was really important because they felt excluded in some way. But I think that, the thing that gets me that's so, and again, it's a little off topic, but that's so fascinating is, in that Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, you're talking about abortion and how much that is central to this dynamic between the Catholic Church and the Supreme Court, and how I just find it fascinating that the death penalty does not spark the same urgency. And, Christianity is a religion founded on a story about someone being wrongly executed by the state. And I just am just really curious why that does not, for people who are very devout, that does not seem to lather up the same urgency as some other issues. But I think that, that craving for this like grandeur of pomp and circumstance and this feeling that people have when they go to church and have these important moments where they have to reflect on the decisions that they make that have large consequences. I think that is something that people crave. And I think that there has to be a way that we can have a secular way of doing that that's more, inclusive of everybody who's making legal decisions around the country, and still gives us that sense of gravitas about all these decisions that are made from the Supreme Court to, local courts around the country that impact people's lives and change people's lives and in some cases destroy people's lives, and what that means. And I would love for there to be a way to have that seriousness and that sense of self-reflection without there being a specific or any religious denomination involved.
I mean, I think that's a fantastic point, and I would also love to see that. I think this court is just too far removed for the real world consequences of their decisions. I mean, even just in the past few months, from overturning the eviction moratorium, to the Remain in Mexico decision. I mean, to all of the COVID decisions, striking down, public health measures so that people can gather together and worship in church and really spread this virus. But I think you're right, and I would love to see a way that we could bring those judges closer to the consequences of their decision. When you were talking about the death penalty, I was reminded of the case of Dominique Ray a few years back, where the Supreme Court, he was a Muslim prisoner in Alabama, and he wanted his religious counselor to be there with him. And the prison said, no, you can have a Christian chaplain in the room with you, but your advisor has to wait out there. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, we're fine with that. We have to execute him on schedule, right? They held to the schedule. The schedule was more important than the religious freedom of a Muslim.
Right.
And it's anyway. That was a little off. It's getting so much of what's wrong with this court. But I also want to ask you too about how do we mark traumatic moments? Because last month was the 20th anniversary of 9/11.
Yeah.
Which was, hugely traumatic for the country. Today is the third anniversary of the Senate confirming Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court amid serious accusations of attempted rape, and in a way that was traumatic for survivors and for others involved in the fight against him. And I'm wondering, how we kind of, as a species, deal with some of those harder things through traditions.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think it's so important. I mean, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I lived in New York at that time. I wrote about this recently. And I think, the conclusion that I've come to is that it's so important to acknowledge time passing and what that means. And, it's such a funny thing we do, right? The Earth goes around the sun, and when it gets back to the same place in relationship to the sun, the whole solar system is moving, another story. But I don't want to get into the nitty gritty. But when we're in the same place in relationship to the sun as we were when something terrible happened or something great happened, or we were born, or we got married, or, all these things, that's when we have this urge to have a little moment of reflection or meditation on what happened. And I think that that's crucial. I think that's really important. I think the night before the inauguration, then President-elect Biden said something in this, they had this memorial for everyone who had died during the pandemic at that point. And he said something along the lines of to heal, we have to remember. And I really believe in that. And I think that, so many of our holidays and our rituals are about that. When you get down to Easter is about the idea of it's the calendar has changed and it's, obviously
Sure.
there's a lot going on there, but this idea of this thing happened and Christmas, from everything from Christmas, although even, not actually Jesus' birthday, another story, to Martin Luther King Day, all these events, which also not usually his birthday because it's just the Monday, but all of these events that we choose to reflect on somebody's life or something traumatic that's happened or something beautiful that's happened are about a year passing. And I think that it's really important to do that. And I think ignoring those, for example, when you love someone and they die, you miss them all year long and you remember them when the thing that you used to do together comes up, or you go to the place you used to go together. But there is something about, wow, it's been a year, it's been 10 years, it's been 20 years, that helps us process this change that is so hard for us to wrap our minds around. And I think for stuff like something as traumatic as 9/11, or like you said, Kavanaugh confirmation, these moments of these deep wounds, there's something about processing the reality of it that requires reflection. And I think everybody does it differently, but I think being aware of how much time has passed and what our feelings are is really powerful and really important. And it allows room to talk about some things that, sometimes we put out of our minds because it's too difficult, or we think too much time has passed and we shouldn't really be worrying about that anymore.
Yeah, that's the part that's interesting to me, because it seems sort of counterintuitive that we celebrate or remember the bad things. But the way that you've just described it as sort of processing our feelings around that makes to me a lot more sense as to then why we would celebrate both the good and the bad, why we would remember both the good and the bad, because we can put our feelings out there and talk about them and work through them kind of together.
And there's this awareness of, if it's something really traumatic, really painful, this idea that, wow, when it happened, I didn't know how I was going to keep going, let's say, and here I still am. And I think that there's something about that can be really healing.
Yeah, excellent. Now, we are going to plan here on the show on covering all of the dreadful corruptions and twists and turns from this Supreme Court right here on Ask an Atheist. We're going to do that, including the abortion case that we were just chatting a little bit around the edges of, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which is likely going to end Roe. Oral arguments are December 1st. We will cover them right here. FFRF submitted a brief in that case. It was authored by the talented Liz Cavell and Rebecca Markert. The court also just agreed to hear another case where, this is in your hometown, Sasha, in Boston there. One party is basically demanding to hoist the Christian flag over Boston City Hall. Now, if you happen to see the insurrection where they carried the Christian flag onto the floor of the Senate, that bothers me a little bit more, but we'll get to that when we cover it on those episodes. Some people were surprised that the court took this case, but not the attorneys here at FFRF. And Patrick Elliott, our senior litigation counsel, actually came up with a really, I think this is a very insightful flowchart that will help people understand exactly how, when, and most importantly, why the Supreme Court takes these cases. We'll leave it up there for a minute so you can read it. And if you want to share this, which I would recommend, go ahead and find it on FFRF's social media. But we are going to be keeping an eye on the Christian flag case out of Boston. And before we take your questions, which we're getting to in just a minute, we're getting a lot of questions rolling in. Just want to highlight another tradition that is returning this year. The Freedom From Religion Foundation is hosting a convention after a COVID hiatus last year. Now, all attendees must be vaccinated. If you want to come, you have to be vaccinated. If you would like to get information or register, you can visit ffrf.us/Boston. The speakers are going to include Handmaid's Tale author Margaret Atwood, Ms. Magazine founder and feminist icon Gloria Steinem, Hispanic Freethinkers founder David Tamayo, former member of the Westboro Baptist Church, Megan Phelps Roper, author of The Power Worshippers, Catherine Stewart, and Black Skeptics of LA founder Sikivu Hutchinson, who's also a very talented author. I was just chatting with her about the fun of editing. And then most importantly, Sasha Sagan and her mother, Andrian, are going to be closing out the conference on Saturday night following the banquet dinner. It's going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it. So, I mean, Sasha, just let me ask you, first question, most important question in the Q&A. How excited are you about this convention?
I mean, I feel like it's crazy that you said most importantly when Margaret Atwood was involved. But I'm super excited. I can't believe I get to be around people. That's my favorite. And I'm like extremely eager for that. And yes, I can't wait. And it's in Boston where I live. So I feel like it's just couldn't be more. I mean, I'm so lucky. So yeah, I can't wait.
Okay, so we do have some questions rolling in. And I'm going to address to first the cross in the room, just for the people who were chatting about this. This is not a Christian cross. This is not a crucifix.
Point of clarification.
Yeah, point of clarification. This is Lord of the Rings nerds out there know what this is. This is the sword that cut the ring from Sauron's hand. It has been remade. Anyway, so we actually have a question from Lucas, and I want to ask you this one, Sasha, because it's about it's a little off topic, but it's about writing, and you're a fantastic writer, and you come from a family of writers, and Lucas is an aspiring writer, and he's wondering, have you ever had writer's block, and what did you do to get over it?
Hi, Lucas. Yes, I've definitely had writer's block. I think my main problem is I struggle more with I've written a whole bunch of stuff. It doesn't make sense and is not readable to another person. And now I have to edit it into a linear thing. And that is my more difficult thing. But I think that it's related because I think that writer's block, I mean, the best thing I can recommend is read as much as you can in all genres, things you normally wouldn't read. You know, if you mostly read nonfiction like I do, read a bunch of fiction. If you whatever it is, authors you've never heard of, a classic that you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be 39 years old and I haven't read War and Peace. I got to do that, for example, as a friend might say. So I would say that, and then just set aside time to write. It doesn't matter what you write. You can write. This is very annoying. I have to sit here and type, but just keep going.
Yeah, that last one is. I think the reading is huge. I think that's the way you get inspired even if you're not thinking about it. But that last point, like force yourself to write, I think is the hardest one to do. But I have a tradition. We discussed it last time on the show. I get up at 5 a.m. every morning and make myself a cup of coffee, and then I go write. It's crazy, but it's the only way that I could ever write anything. And I think sometimes if you have actual writer's block and you are trying to get, say, a chapter on your thing done and you are just stuck, you should not. You should leave it and you should write something that you want to write. I wrote one of my favorite pieces I ever wrote was just this really short, maybe 200 words to my dad about how we share this distinctive laugh, and it's not our normal laugh. It's a kind of our surprise laugh, and I wrote a little bit about that when I was really stuck once on the founding myth, and I ended up giving it to him as a present, but it got that doing something creative and different than what I was trying to do ended up breaking through that barrier elsewhere. If that's helpful. And I think that's why the reading...
That's good advice.
I think that's why the reading other books and stuff that you were talking about too also can do that. It sort of, you're not breaking through it, maybe you're kind of like going around it.
Yes.
Okay, so Heather Johnson asks, how do you handle the tradition of Santa? And I imagine she's asking that kind of from the secular perspective. How is I think...
Yes, I thought you were going to say she's asking that as a parent, not like how I handle Santa. Yes. So we don't do Santa. I have a 4-year-old. My husband, his family is traditionally Christian. My family has traditionally been Jewish. We do Christmas light and we do Hanukkah light. But we talk about Santa as like a character the way you would talk about like seeing a witch during Halloween. And, I'm like, this is part of the iconography of the holiday. It's a character. Like, if she sees someone dressed up, I'm like, oh, that's so exciting. Someone's dressed up as Santa. But we do not like do like cookies out on Christmas Eve or like presents with like a different handwriting, on the note. And so we'll see. Maybe this is going to be like a huge topic in therapy when she's older, but time will tell. Yeah, we just are like, it's just part of the decor and mythology of the holiday, as holidays have.
Yeah, and that
I kind of think I might do the tooth fairy, though. I don't know.
But it can all still be fun too, and still be like myths can be just as fun. You don't have to actually believe.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like I remember as a kid like the crumbs on the plate on Christmas morning and like the milk halfway gone. And I also remember thinking like how like your reasonable mind kicks in as a kid too. Like how can Santa eat that many cookies? If he's eating 2 cookies at every house, I mean, no wonder he's got he laughs like a bowl full of jelly or whatever. But like, it's just not possible. And then your brain starts, and that's like leave aside the flying reindeer and sleigh.
Also, most people don't have chimneys anymore. Like, how's he getting inside?
Break B&E. Come on, Santa.
Yeah.
I do remember, I'll tell this story because I talked about my dad earlier. My dad once, when I was not believing or starting to get skeptical about the Easter Bunny, basically said, well, let's do an experiment. We'll set a trap for the Easter Bunny. And so we laid out on like one of those big baking sheets, like with a little lip. We covered it in flour and put it near the front door. And went to bed, the idea being the Easter Bunny would hop into it and then leave tracks around our house if he/she was real. And went to bed, woke up the next morning, and there were huge bunny footprints around the house. And my dad had cut out the imprints from cardboard and made them go around the house. And then it was, okay, go get the animal book from the shelf and we'll actually match up the footprints and see if it's actually a bunny, because that could be a fox for all you know. And it was really, it was fun. But it's like one of my more fun memories, but I didn't lose anything when they told me, that was just your dad.
Did you figure it out? Or were you like, it's proven fact, it's real? By the end of the day, were you like more convinced or less convinced?
I don't remember. And I haven't had to bring it up in therapy ever, so I feel like either way we're in good shape.
Best news I've heard all day.
Okay, so Susie asks, this is the opposite end of what we were just talking about. I was reading about the recent report that the Catholic Church in France has abused over 300,000 children. When are these clergy going to be arrested, especially the ones that covered up the crime? I mean, this is just horrific. I have not been able to read the report yet. For everybody, if you haven't heard, if this is the first time you're hearing this news, I'm sorry. But yeah, it was 3,000 priests, 300,000 children over 70 years. The report is only out in French, as I understand it, and the website was down yesterday. So many people were trying to get a copy of it. I mean, we're talking one child every 2 hours for 70 years. And these are the numbers in the report. This is what's been reported. It's almost certainly higher, both in terms of the number of priests and the number of victims. So, I mean, it's horrific, and it's something that is happening everywhere. I mean, the story in America broke in Boston, where you're sitting, Sasha, but every major city in the country has had one of these scandals. Every country that's looked into it, Australia, Brazil, Canada. I mean, we saw what's been happening at the schools up there. And so it's horrific, and it's hard to even put in, the horror is hard to put into words, I find.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only consolation is it's coming out, and think of all the people who have had this secret weighing on them, who lived their whole lives and never told anyone or never had anyone else understand what they had been through. And maybe some real good can come from understanding how bad this has been and how it must be prevented going forward.
Yeah, and I think, Susie, your point about arresting and especially those that have covered up the crimes, I think is important. I will say, in cases like this, historically, we've humans have tended to let the Catholic Church police itself, which obviously does not work. We've treated, and the media has treated defrocking of priests as somehow a sufficient punishment or deterrent for this, which is obviously not the case, and that mindset needs to shift. Let's go back completely to the other poll. Heather Johnson asks, does anybody else find Elf on the Shelf creepy?
Yeah. Really, sip, like really good. Yeah. Yes. I mean, there's so much of, this is a point my mom has made, like there's so much of religion is about surveillance.
Yeah.
You know, so it's always watching you and checking on your behavior and making sure you're not up to anything. And I think that's not a great message. And yes, I know Elf on the Shelf is weird for sure. I mean, definitely.
It's just all counterproductive. Like if you want to raise people that are going to behave well, like they need to be able to behave well when nobody is watching. I mean, that's like almost the definition of conscience. I think, you know, you
right. And it can't be because you might get caught. It has to be because it's like it's just not nice to, like, you know, whatever, leave all your toys in the middle of the living room or whatever. I don't know. I cleared a bunch of toys from behind me before we went on the air, so maybe that's about me.
We also have a question. You should feel free to weigh in on this. Aki Seiko, I apologize. I'm getting this name wrong. Asks, what case that the Supreme Court is taking this fall are you most worried about? What case, if ruled incorrectly, has the biggest repercussions? Do you want to go first, Sasha? Do you have one?
I mean, I just think maybe this is my own ignorance in terms of how many high stakes cases there are, and I'm just getting the surface level of what you know, the news reports. I certainly don't have the expertise that you have, Andrew, but certainly seems like reproductive freedom is a serious issue on the line.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. That affects half of the American population, really, and it's an assault on our bodily autonomy, so it affects everyone. I think that case, so there's a couple cases that deal with reproductive justice. There's the challenges to Texas SB 8, which are basically going up and down the courts right now. And you have Center for Reproductive Rights trying to get the Supreme Court to do the right thing on it, which it has declined to do on the shadow docket. And then you have the Dobbs case that we mentioned earlier on, which has oral arguments on December 1st, which we will be covering here on the show. And that case is going through the regular docket and is likely the one that is going to expand the gutting or overturning of Roe to the entire country. And I think the important thing to note about that, and the reason it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest of the session, is that it's not going to be limited to abortion. The rationale underlying that is going to extend to contraception. They are absolutely coming for contraception. We've covered that on this show. I've written extensively about it. They also are going to be coming for marriage equality, I'm pretty sure. And I just wrote an op-ed for Religion Dispatches about this last week. And you can see that pretty clearly if you know what to look for. And I think they've got the votes on this Supreme Court. And got the votes is the right way to say that. I'm very worried. There's a couple of religious freedom cases. The court took the Christian flag case. The religious freedom case that I'm watching most is a vouchers case out of Maine, Carson v. Macon, which might not seem as big a deal as reproductive justice, but I think it could be the case in which the Supreme Court finally weaponizes religious freedom. And what I'm most worried about is the other side using that to tear down one of the last walls separating state and church between the public schools and religion, which I fear is how that case will be wielded when it comes down the wrong way by this court. So those are the two big ones that I'm watching. I think reproductive justice and rights, I'm so deeply worried about. And, you know, I mean, we've been talking on this show since Donald Trump won the election, and it became clear that he was going to, as he promised on the campaign, put in justices on the court that wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade. I mean, as you know, Sasha, we were joking earlier, right? Like, you don't steal seats on the Supreme Court to install people who you just like better.
Right.
This is why they did it. I'm pretty convinced, and I have been from the beginning, that the reason they put Amy Coney Barrett on the court was to write the decision that overturns Roe. Because how can it be an anti-woman decision if a woman writes it?
Right. I mean, the whole contraception thing you mentioned, this is what's so, it's such a tell, you know, because it's like, if your goal is really just about minimizing the number of abortions in the country, then making contraception as just free and easy to get as possible, and everybody knows how it works and it's available, would be, I would think, one of the central facets of how you get where you want to be if your goal is no abortions. And it's just so revealing that it's not about that when contraception is central to what is also on the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's the war on women. It's controlling women, controlling their bodies, putting them back in their place. We have one more question from Ann Ben-Dixon. Any advice about how to encourage school districts to think about holiday issues when planning their yearly calendars? My local school district is now considering Muslim holy days, but that's a small step toward thinking about non-believers. I think Ann is trying to say, you know, what about including non-believers in kind of these various holiday planning? I believe.
Well, I think we should get some holidays going. I think that would be a good start. Like, if we really work hard to make like the winter solstice like a sacrosanct day, then we can, you know, part of the problem is we're so independent. We don't have, you know, certain days of the year that we're like, I cannot work on the winter solstice. It is against my belief system. But I don't know how constructive that is. It's kind of a longer term project.
I mean, we need to, you know, we're trying to take back the court, but we also need to take back the holidays, really. Like, because it was about the winter solstice, and then Christianity came along and planted its flag in that, as it's trying to plant its flag on the Boston City Hall, and as it did in the Senate. Anyway, that's our show for today. Sasha, thank you so much for joining us. It was really a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure. Literally anytime.
Well, we're going to have you back then for sure. So please check out Sasha's new paperback of For Small Creatures Such as We. Grab it for your book club. Make your book club read it. Get into those discussion questions. You see, it was really a fun discussion we just had. And this is a lovely way to add some meaning to this life. So grab that paperback. You can pick up a copy of the hardback from the FFRF store. And while you're there, you can sign up to become a member. And if you want to come see Sasha in person along with Gloria Steinem and Margaret Atwood and Ann Druyan and Catherine Stewart and many more, register at ffrf.us/Boston for that convention. And remember, you must be vaccinated to attend. Also, be sure to check out our other FFRF programs. This week's guests on our broadcast program, Free Thought Matters, is Ryan Burge, author of The Nuns, Where They Came From, Who They Are, and Where They're Going. The answer is not to hell, I don't think. Anyway, this examines the meteoric increase in numbers of the non-religious in America, and you can see Free Thought Matters on TV stations across the country and on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Also, be sure to check out Free Thought Radio, our weekly radio program and podcast featuring Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker, interviewing newsmakers from a free thought perspective. And thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.